Fudo Yukimitsu, a problematic teenager who whines more than even a spoiled bitch like Regina George, is one of the 4 great swords that once belonged to Oda Nobunaga. He gets summoned to defend history with other warriors but ends up being a pain. It all becomes an adventure as he is paired with the 3 other great swords and gets sent back in time during the assassination of their master to stop evil. Our story begins with a great battle which takes place in the year 1582 at the Honnoji Temple, where the demon king Oda Nobunaga resides, and he gets assassinated during the heat of the battle, leaving behind his sword covered in flames. Back to the present, Suza, one of Nobunaga's 4 great swords, is tormented by frequent nightmares of the Honnoji incident. Elsewhere, Kunihiro and a team of other sword warriors are seen fighting the time retrograde army that seeks to destroy the past. They successfully complete the mission by fighting off the army and return back to the citadel just in time for breakfast. Meanwhile, a new sword warrior and one of Nobunaga's 4 great swords, Fudo Yukimitsu, has manifested in the citadel, ready to serve his new master, and he is welcomed by Mikazuki. Later that day, Suza speaks with fellow sword warrior Yagen concerning his nightmares concerning the Honnoji incident that took place many years ago. Although Yagen could understand Suza's worries because he is also one of the 4 great swords of Nobunaga, he is unable to offer much assistance to Suza, so he gives him medicine to help him sleep. At the training room, Kunihiro duels with a fellow sword warrior in an attempt to polish his fighting skills, and their fight ends in a draw. Suza, who happens to be passing by the training room, gets called by his fellow sword warriors to join them, but he declines. Suddenly, everyone's attention is drawn towards the newcomer, Fudo, who walks into the room very tipsy, throwing the rule of first impression straight out the window. He slumps on the floor like my fat cousin after consuming many calories and gets scolded by the others. He introduces himself to everyone as Fudo Yukimitsu, Nobunaga's favorite and beloved sword. His attention gets drawn towards Suza after he is told that Suza is also one of Nobunaga's swords. Getting closer to him, Fudo tells Suza he recognizes him to also be one of their master's favorites as well, but Suza replies that he does not recognize Fudo, which leaves him feeling disappointed. Mikazuki interrupts and informs everyone he meant to introduce Fudo to them while showing him around the citadel since he is a newcomer, but he was given another task by their master, so he assigns the role of showing Fudo around to Suza. Suza looks hesitant and unsure about this, but Fudo is all excited. Kunihiro steps in and offers to assist Suza in showing Fudo around the citadel. During their tour of the citadel, Kunihiro informs Fudo that they are all swords which were manifested by their new master to defend history from the retrograde army that aims to rewrite and destroy it. He also explains to Fudo that they are tasked with the responsibility of taking care of their mortal bodies, so they clothe and feed themselves, and on the days when they have no mission, they rest because it is also important. Their mini-tour is interrupted by a group of sword warriors, and Fudo introduces himself once again, the beloved sword once belonging to Nobunaga. They excitedly introduce him to Hasabe, as he is also one of Nobunaga's swords, with hopes that Fudo can reminisce on old times with him. However, Hasabe is very unwelcoming and makes it clear to Fudo that he wants nothing to do with Nobunaga since they are all serving a new master. As he walks away, Fudo looks irritated by his behavior. Later that evening, Yagen sits with Suza and inquires about Fudo, as he heard he also belonged to their former master, Nobunaga. He talks about Nobunaga's obsession with collecting famed swords, which gets Suza to recount how Nobunaga defeated his initial master and claimed him as his own after personally branding him. He expressed his sadness over being passed around like a loose bitch from one master to the other, all because they were fascinated by the brand Nobunaga left on him as a sword. He tells Yagen he feels like a caged bird because he can't do anything but look pretty like a decorative doormat, as none of his masters ever used him for actual battles. Elsewhere, Kunihiro sits alone, lost in his own thoughts, and gets summoned to see their master. He arrives and is told by Mikazuki that their master wished to appoint him as his replacement in serving as the citadel's attendant. Kunihiro is surprised by this and feels undeserving of this position, and reminds the master of his past failure as the citadel's attendant, which almost led to his squad being wiped out during battle. The master encourages Kunihiro by telling him he has grown as a sword warrior, and he has faith in him, which leaves Kunihiro with no choice but to accept the position being offered to him. However, Kunihiro finds it difficult to sleep that night as he gets lost in thoughts once again. The following morning, Fudo is excitedly doing his duty at the farm with other sword warriors, while Suza watches him from a slight distance and tells Yagen how he is confused about how he served the same master with Fudo, but they both have different personalities. Meanwhile, Kunihiro is busy training, and Hasabe walks up to him to congratulate him on his appointment by their master as their attendant sword in the citadel. However, Kunihiro still feels undeserving of this position and asks Hasabe on his thoughts about the appointment. Hasabe replies that he respects the decision of their master. The other sword warriors agree with Hasabe and ask Kunihiro to do his duty instead of sulking. After eating dinner that night, everyone retired to bed, but Suza still gets another nightmare about the Honnoji incident, but this time he feels himself burning and wakes up. The following day during breakfast, he is lost in thoughts and gets startled when a fellow sword warrior, Sayo, asks if he is okay. After breakfast, Yagen checks up on Suza as he had been acting out of place. They are joined by another sword warrior who explains to Suza that his nightmares are a part of his story and must be trying to tell him something. However, their conversation is cut short as he prepares to join his squad on a mission. Fudo sees that more sword warriors are all dressed up in battle regalia and gets excited, asking to join them on their mission. Kunihiro tells him to sober up and scolds him by making it clear to Fudo that they weren't going to play games because defending history from the retrograde army is a battle. He goes on to explain to Fudo that this army is summoned by history revolutionists to change history, and they can appear at any era, so they have been manifested by their master to defend history against the evil forces. Later that evening, Fudo sits alone and gets approached by Midare, who asks if he was sulking over Kunihiro scolding him earlier that day. Fudo explains to Midare that he only thought about what it means to defend history because he still couldn't understand it. Midare tells him he will come to understand someday. The squad arrived back in 1614 during the winter siege of Osaka. The retrograde army are already attacking and trying to destroy that history, but the squad steps in and separates to fight their enemies individually. However, Kusetsu hesitates during battle as the era is related to his former master, whom he respects. The enemy takes advantage of his hesitation and tries to strike, but Sayo cushions the blow. They all reassemble after defeating the retrograde army, and everyone is shocked to see that Sayo was gravely wounded. Kusetsu feels guilty and tells everyone it's his fault that Sayo got injured. Back at the citadel, everyone is relieved to learn that Sayo is getting better. A few of the sword warriors gather for a meeting with Kunihiro, and he asks Kaosetsu what happened during their mission. Kaosetsu explains to everyone that their mission happened to be at a place where his former master facilitated peaceful negotiations, and so he couldn't bring himself to fight there, but the enemy exploited his weakness, and Sayo paid the price. In response to Kaosetsu's feeling of guilt, Hasabe and the others tell him not to beat himself up because Sayo wouldn't be happy to see him that way. Later that night, while watching over Sayo with Suza, Kosetsu sees that he is having a nightmare and keeps calling out for revenge. He explains to Suza that Sayo's former master was filled with revenge after his mom was killed, and he did not rest till he executed his revenge by slaying his mother's killer, so this filled Sayo with the feelings of revenge as well. Suza replied that he understands Sayo as he is also haunted by his past. Looking at Suza, Kusetsu tells him he looks so agonized and he is worried about him. The next day, the sword warriors gather for a council meeting with Kunihiro. He asks each one about their mission, and from the intel gathered, he realizes that his first task is to come up with a countermeasure to the increase in the Time Retrograde Army's strength. Their meeting is interrupted by Fudo, who happened to be eavesdropping on them. He walks in drunk as usual and requests that they take him along during their next mission because since they visit past events to defend history, then he would probably meet his first master Nobunaga once again. The warriors ask why and what he would do if he meets Nobunaga, and he replies that he couldn't save him as his sword in the past, and he might come to understand the reason why he is fighting alongside them once he meets Nobunaga. Repulsed by his words, Hasabe tells Kunihiro to discipline Fudo, and properly educate him on why they are members of the citadel. He storms out of the room and Fudo follows behind, shouting at him like a pissed-off lover. That night, Kunihiro approaches Fudo, who happens to be sitting alone outside. Fudo asks if he has come to lecture him, but Kunihiro looks defeated and sits with him instead. He tells Fudo that even if he meets Nobunaga in the past, he won't be able to save him, because that is history, and their job is to defend history, not change it. Fudo objects to this and asks why they only defend history. Out of nowhere, Mikazuki replies that they are just objects that do as their master has instructed. Feeling defiant, Fudo asks Mikazuki what will happen if he refuses to abide by such rules. And with a smile on his face, Mikazuki simply points his sword at Fudo, threatening him that if he decides to be a useless piece of shit, he would be cut down instantly like Lord Eddard Stark from Game of Thrones, so he shouldn't mess around and find out. The next morning, Hasebe is seen training at the dojo with Suza, but it seems like he is struggling, so the others tell him to take it easy. He is determined to keep training, but Suza easily parries off his attacks and keeps pushing him back. During their duel, Hasebe's thoughts were filled with Fudo and his incessant mentioning of Oda Nobunaga. Feeling irritated once more, he screams out in anger, which surprises Suza. He ends the duel and walks out of the training ground, which leaves the others looking around in worry and concern. In his room, Hasebe sits and rests against the wall, reminiscing about how he was gifted as a sword to a random man who was favored by Nobunaga many years ago before his assassination. Meanwhile, Fudo is seen drunk as usual and singing the favorite poems of his former master, Nobunaga, to some of the younger sword warriors. However, they were bored by his cheap and lackluster performance, which slightly ticked off Fudo. Suddenly, Hasebe approaches them and asks Sayo if he was fully healed to be outside with his mates, and Sayo responds in affirmative, saying he would rot in bed if he stays indoors forever. Fudo expresses his surprise at Hasebe showing concern, as he pictured him to always be an angry bird, but this pisses off Hasebe as Fudo addressed him by an old name given to him by Nobunaga, which he loathes. He tells Fudo to stop whining like a spoiled brat and accept that Nobunaga is no more, and he has a new master. Fudo spits back at Hasebe, telling him that he can't forget his old master simply because he has a new one, as both of them are equally important to him. In response, Hasebe asks him not to place a trashy underachiever like Nobunaga next to their master. Pissed off by this statement, Fudo grabs Hasebe by the collar and demands that he retract such foul words against his former master, Nobunaga. Hasebe is unwilling to do so, which leads to a squabble between the two. Suza encounters the drama while passing by and asks the youngsters what the problem was. Fudo tells him that Hasebe insulted their former master, who was nothing but kind to them. Hearing the word Nobunaga got Suza's eyes dizzy, and to everyone's surprise, a tear rolled down his cheeks. To avoid the worried looks on their faces, Suza ran off. Kunihiro steps in and asks what the commotion was all about, but Hasebe simply says nothing and walks away, leaving the youngsters to explain all the details. He joins Yagen, who acknowledges that Fudo has been a problem child ever since he manifested in the citadel. He advises Hasebe not to lose his cool, even though he understands his frustration, as he is also one of Nobunaga's swords. Looking out the window, all Hasebe could think of was how annoying it is that their former master still haunts them even in death. A few of the sword warriors gather at the training ground and discuss the latest incident between Fudo and Hasebe. They all point out that Fudo has been a menace ever since his manifestation, and this has often triggered Hasebe and Suza, which affects them in different ways. They ponder over a way to get these swords of Nobunaga to settle their disputes once and for all. Meanwhile, Suza is lost in his own thoughts while cleaning the stables. Kusetsu asks if he was done cleaning and suggests that they go for a ride, which Suza agrees to. Elsewhere in the citadel, Kunihiro is seen exercising with other sword warriors, and during their short break they observe that he was worried and knew it was because of the Oda sword, especially after the fight between Fudo and Hasebe. Kunihiro complains of how useless he is in handling such matters despite being the citadel's attendant, but the others tell him it's not his fault. However, he questions their master's decision in appointing him as the attendant when there were other qualified candidates, especially after he almost wiped out his own squad in the past due to his bad leadership and poor decisions. In hearing this, the other sword warriors make it clear to him that their master's appointment was not a mistake. They also tell Kunihiro that they were still alive and did not die from that incident, so he doesn't have to keep beating himself up over the past. Mikazuki walks in and reminds Kunihiro that their master made him the Citadel's attendant because he believes he has grown as a sword warrior, and all he has to do is prove that their master was not wrong about him. Feeling confident once again, Kunihiro agrees with everyone. He asks what could be done about the Oda Sword's issues, and a few other sword warriors who just walked in gave him an idea. The following morning, all sword warriors in the Citadel were summoned, and Kunihiro announced to everyone that they would be holding a free-for-all combat training exercise which will consist of 4 teams pitted against each other. Some of the sword warriors were curious to know why such an exercise was being held and asked if their master gave his approval, which Kunihiro said was given. Hasebe asked why they were fighting each other instead of getting another citadel involved in the exercise to make it more of a competition, but Kunihiro explains that the essence of the exercise was not only to build their strength, but to strengthen their relationship among each other. He goes ahead to call out the lineup for each of the tour teams. The first team consists of Kunihiro, Kuninaga, Yagen, Suza, Fudo, and Hasebe, which leaves Hasebe shocked at such a lineup. He complains to Kunihiro about putting him in such a team, but Mikazuki asks him if he was questioning the decision of their master as he approved the lineup. This left Hasebe with no choice but to keep shut and be an obedient dog. With all the teams announced, Kunihiro informs everyone that the exercise begins at noon the next day, and they all disperse. Hasebe and Fudo turn their faces away from each other like fighting couples. Finally, the day for the combat exercise has come, and the youngsters are gathered outside to watch their elders tussle it out in the battle arena, which happens to be the forest. Midar introduces herself as the MC for the event and televises the exercise with the aid of special foxes called the Konosuke that will be sending across vibrant images of the whole battle through their special eyes. Kunihiro starts off by reading out the rules of the game, making it clear to the participants that the exercise ends by evening, and the team with the most members still standing wins. A huge horn gets blown signaling the game to begin, and everyone takes off immediately, leaving just the Oda swords as Hasebe and Fudo were bickering with each other once again like couples. Kunihiro scolds them to stop their petty squabble and get serious with the exercise as it had already begun. This prompts everyone to disperse towards different paths. The battle begins as various teams cross swords with each other. For some fighters, their speed is put to the test, and not even the eyes of the fox could keep up with their quick movements. More teams confront their opponents, and the battle gets more intense. Kunihiro encounters Mikazuki and tries to follow the ways of Naruto's Talk no Jutsu, but Mikazuki attacks and reminds him that they are there to battle and not chatter. Meanwhile, Hasebe runs into Suza, and he tries apologizing to Suza for having a bad attitude in the past. Suza tries having a conversation with him about their former master Nobunaga, but their moment is interrupted by opponents that came attacking. They are against 4 opponents, so they each focus on 2 to fight. Hasebe stands his ground against his opponents, who are excellent fighters by defending and attacking. Suza manages to push back one of his opponents and rejoins Hasebe. Despite their tenacity, Hasebe and Suza are still at a disadvantage against 2 to 4 opponents. Suddenly, Yagen jumps in and tells them he would be making them 3 even though they're still at a disadvantage, so they all move to attack once more. Meanwhile, Kunihiro and Mikazuki are still fighting, with Kunihiro mostly blocking attacks while reminding Mikazuki that the exercise was just to settle the issues between the Oda swords, so he shouldn't be fighting him so seriously. In response, Mikazuki simply tells him to defeat him so he can move along and do as he wants. Suddenly, they are attacked by 2 opponents, but they swiftly dodge their swords. Mikazuki suggests to Kunihiro that they join forces and take out the strong opponents, leaving him surprised. On the other hand, Hasebe, Yagen and Suza are holding their own against their 4 opponents when Fudo suddenly comes flying in with his tiny sword, like it would make a difference. The others are surprised by his tacky entrance, and like clockwork, he begins rambling about how he would teach them not to mess with him. Yagen scolds him not to act alone as they are a team, but the spoiled brat won't give up and keeps up the egotistical attitude like he is Mr. Incredible, telling them how he is Nobunaga's favorite pet. Pissed off by his behavior, Hasebe tells him to choke on his sausage and calls Nobunaga a disappointment even in death for choosing such a mediocre brat as his favorite. Fudo grabs him by the collar and demands that he stops disrespecting the memory of his former master, but Hasebe could care less. Listening to their unending bickering, Suza gets mentally overloaded by their bullshit and falls unconscious, which ends the whole exercise for the day. Everyone is disappointed that their plan to get the Oda swords to patch things up didn't work out. Kunihiro goes to check on Suza, but he overhears Yagen say that Suza just needs to rest, and so he walks away. That night, he sits under the moon to think, and gets joined by Mikazuki. They drink sake together, and he asks Mikazuki what he should do to resolve the Oda Sword's issues, but Mikazuki responds with riddles. The next morning, Suza, Yagen, Hasebe and Fudao are summoned before their master, as they have been selected on a mission involving the Honnoji Temple incident that occurred in 1582, with Kunihiro and Mikazuki accompanying them to make sure the mission is successful. The squad arrives back in time at Kyoto to prevent any meddling in the Honnoji incident. They all separate into 3 groups to check out the area for the Time Retrograde Army. Mikazuki, Kunihiro, Hasebe and Yagen couldn't see any signs of the evil forces making a move. Meanwhile, Suza and Fudo are patrolling their area and no signs of the Retrograde Army are seen as well, but Fudo is not concerned about the mission and is more excited to be back to this era. With so much enthusiasm, he asks Suza for directions to the Honnoji Temple, but Suza reminds him that they are on a mission to defend history and not meddle with it, and even if he sees Nobunaga, he is prohibited from getting involved with his death. Suddenly, they are interrupted by a brawl happening in the street, and Fudo takes the opportunity to run off alone. Other members of the squad meet up as planned to discuss their next move, but they are worried that Suza and Fudo didn't show up too. Hasebe tells them that he was sure that Fudo is up to no good, so Kunihiro suggests they go looking for them. Fudo gets lost as he looks around for the Honnoji Temple, and Suza finally catches up to him in no time. He calls Fudo an amateur for being easy to trace and tells him to follow him back to join the others, but Fudo insists on going to the Honnoji Temple. He asks Suza why he was not interested in seeing Nobunaga once again, even though he was with him in his final moments. Suza simply replies that he was nothing but a caged bird in the hands of their former master, as he was never put to use. Seeing the sad look on his face, Fudo tries to cheer Suza up by telling him he was Nobunaga's most beautiful sword, and he didn't want to taint him with blood, which is why he never used him in battle. Their moment gets interrupted by the Time Retrograde Army as they surround the duo. Suza blocks their attacks and Fudo tries to attack but gets slammed to the wall. So much for constantly bragging that he is Nobunaga's favorite sword, only to be more useless than Sakura in a fight. Luckily for him, Hasebe steps in and blocks another attack from sending him to the great beyond. Being an ungrateful brat, Fudo barks at Hasebe that his help wasn't needed, but Hasebe tells him he was only following their master's orders. Yagen joins the trio to fight the evil forces and Fudo chases after one, trying to escape, prompting Hasebe to ask Yagen to go after him. Fudo ends up getting ambushed by the Time Retrograde Army, but once again, he is luckily saved by Yagen, who gets wounded by a blade in the process. He eliminates the evil forces, but more keep crawling out and they are overwhelmed by their numbers. Suddenly, Mori Ranmaru, Fudo's second master, comes to aid them, and to their surprise, the Time Retrograde Army runs off. Fudo is so excited to see his second master and starts chattering away. However, the others grab him and start walking away before he makes a complete mess of the whole mission by running his loose mouth. Mori sees that Yagen is wounded and suggests that they follow him to his room at the Honnoji Temple so he can patch up his wound. They are hesitant but eventually agree. Yagen gets his wound treated and they all thank Mori for his help. Fudo tries to run his mouth again, but Hasebe grabs him, telling him to say nothing but thanks to their host. They all say their goodbyes to Mori and leave. On their way back, Hasabi is worried that their interaction with Mori could alter history, so Suza apologizes, but Fudo tells everyone it's not Suza's fault, but his for running off and acting alone. Yagen reveals to everyone that he was more worried about how the Time Retrograde army took off when Mori stepped in to defend them. Eventually, Kunihiro and Mikazuki meet up with them, and Fudo apologizes to Kunihiro for being a useless piece of garbage who put everyone in danger. Kunihiro replies by telling him he feels useless sometimes as well, but he encourages Fudo to step up and become useful, as he has decided to do the same, instead of hiding behind the tag to escape his responsibilities. As the squad looks forward to the Honnoji incident, which will take place the next day, Mori is being attacked by the Time Retrograde army. He is outnumbered and eventually gets suffocated and corrupted by the evil forces. With the Honnoji incident looming, the former Oda swords express their complicated feelings about the former owner. Suza explains that he was taken by Nobunaga as a spoil of war after he defeated one of his enemies, and ever since then he has been identified as one of his swords. He also mentioned that he got burned during this incident, and since then he always felt the flames even in his nightmares. Yagen simply stated that he doesn't harbor any negative feelings towards Nobunaga, and all he just wants is to understand the kind of man he was during his time. Kunihiro catches Fudo eavesdropping and tells him to go join in their conversation if he has something to say, since he is also an Oda sword. Fudo declines as he has nothing to say, and simply tells Kunihiro he has decided to help them fight to defend history from being altered, so the Honnoji incident will take place as it should. Mikazuki informs everyone to get ready as it was time for the incident to take place. Finally, Akechi Mitsuhide raises the curtain on the fateful battle, and his troops swoop into the temple with their weapons, but they arrive to discover that evil forces have taken over the temple. Meanwhile, Fudo couldn't bear to watch history unfold before his eyes and tries to step out, but he is held from leaving. He asks Hasabi if he doesn't care about what happens to Nobunaga, but Hasabi tells him the old fool can rot in the pits of hell and orders Fudo to leave if he would get in their way instead of defending history as a sword warrior. With that, they all head out towards the temple, leaving Fudo to scream like a confused lunatic. Back in the temple, Mori fights his way through their invaders in an attempt to get to Nobunaga and protect him. He eventually gets run through by a spear leading to his death, but to his attacker's shock, he turns into a zombie and sends him flying several feet away, then proceeds to make his way to Nobunaga. The squad arrives at the temple and starts eliminating the Time Retrograde army attempting to rewrite history. On the other hand, Fudo runs around looking for Mori as he passes through several rooms. He finds him, but Mori looks like he is ready to start dancing to Michael Jackson's Thriller. Despite seeing Mori looking like a zombie, Fudo, with his last 2 brain cells, tries running towards him but gets stopped by Hasabi from behind. They all tell him to observe as Mori is not human anymore. Mori finally transforms into a monster possessed by the Time Retrograde army and attacks the squad after declaring them his enemy. Fudo blocks Mori's attacks and tells him he doesn't want to fight, while asking that he tends his wounds so he won't die. Apparently, Fudo is not just a brat, but he is also dumb, so Mori rewards his concerns by sending him flying away with a powerful slash. The others surround Fudo to fight against the Retrograde army, but he runs off once again, chasing after Mori. Kunihiro calls on Suza to go after Fudo before he does something more crazy. Mori encounters Mitsuhide and asks him why he betrayed Nobunaga, but Mitsuhide is unwavering in his resolve to end Nobunaga and demands that Mori move out of his way. In response, Mori attacks, but Fudo blocks it and gets thrown away. He tries striking again with his sword, but this time Suza defends Mitsuhide against his attack. He tells Mori that he is meant to be dead, but rather he has been corrupted by evil forces to rewrite the course of history. Mori keeps attacking, hoping to get to Mitsuhide, but Fudo and Suza parry his attacks, protecting Mitsuhide. Annoyed by their interference in his plans, he transforms into Goro from Mortal Kombat by growing extra pairs of arms from the back to fight with more swords. Fudo and Suza struggle to defend against his attacks, so Suza tells Mitsuhide to run along and carry out his mission like the history book said. Seeing his prey gone, Mitsuhide goes on a rampage and sends the two sword warriors flying back. Just in time, the rest of the squad rejoins with Souza and Fudo, ready to put an end to Mori as he has been completely corrupted by the evil forces. Mori summons more of the Time Retrograde army to his side and they all attack the squad. Everyone has their hands full fighting, which gives Mori the opportunity to slip away and go hunting for Mitsuhide to stop him from assassinating Nobunaga. As usual, Fudo follows behind, calling out to Mori, but he gets blocked by more of the Time Retrograde army and manages to run through them. Finally, he is alone with Mori in a room and tries reaching out to him once again, but Mori attacks him. However, this time his attacks are weak as he is dying and eventually he falls to the ground, telling Fudo to kill him since that's what he came to do. Fudo tells him he needs to get his wounds checked so he can survive and he is not there to fight him. To his surprise, Mori stabs him and makes it clear that if he won't kill him, then he would kill anyone standing in his way to protect Nobunaga. He tries to land the finishing blow on Fudo, but the rest of the squad arrives just in time to protect Fudo. Seeing that he is outnumbered, Mori absorbs all the Time Retrograde army within himself to increase his strength, leaving Kunihiro and the others shocked as they have never fought such an enemy before. With his newfound strength, Mori attacks the squad, sending a few flying to the wall. Everyone struggles against him as his new strength makes him more difficult to fight. Hasebe calls on Fudo to join the fight as they were getting overwhelmed, but he simply stood frozen in place, unable to lift a finger and help his squad. The battle gets more intense and Fudo eventually decides to help Mori by stopping Souza and the others from killing him. However, a zombie will always be a zombie, so Mori ends up cutting Fudo down from behind while he was protecting him. Hasebe is annoyed at how useless Fudo has been since the beginning of the battle, yet he still stands in their way by protecting the enemy. Feeling more determined to put an end to the monstrosity that Mori had turned into, the rest of the squad works together and successfully cuts down Mori, while Fudo could only watch and cry for them to stop. With his defeat, the corrupted Mori sheds the demon aura and still insists on going to save Nobunaga, but Souza cuts him down. Hearing Souza's name, he tells Souza he remembers him to be one of Nobunaga's favorite swords and asks him why he was not defending and protecting his master. Souza ignores his question, so Mori tells him he has an answer to his last question of what Nobunaga meant to him. He explains that he simply loves his lord and wished to be his shield, but it's unfortunate he can't do that. Meanwhile, Mitsuhide keeps searching for Nobunaga and finds his followers, but seeing that they won't give up his location, he kills them. He walks into a room filled with the camellia flower, dreaded by warriors because it reminded them of a beheading. Fudo starts walking out, but Mikazuki stops him in his tracks and asks him if he remembers his warning that he would be cut down if he tries to alter history, but Fudo doesn't care and tells Mikazuki he would be leaving anyways. Hasebe asks him if he is intentionally disobeying their master's order, and he tells him to ask their master for forgiveness. Souza lays Mori's lifeless body down and proceeds to go after Fudo. He explains to Hasebe that he has realized that the memory of Nobunaga hunts all of them that once belonged to him, so they must face their problems once and for all. Their path is blocked by more of the Time Retrograde army, but they are ready to cut through anything. The squad individually fights against the multiple numbers of the Time Retrograde army. Hasebe and Yagen struggle against their opponents, but Mikazuki and Kunihiro skillfully cut down each and every evil force they come to face. However, the battle gets more intense, and the Time Retrograde army keeps overwhelming the warriors with their numbers, wounding most of them. While fighting, Souza gets wounded and calls himself a useless sword only fit for decorations. However, Yagen and Hasebe stand in to protect him and tell him they will always have each other's backs. Mikazuki informs them that he and Kunihiro will handle the Time Retrograde army in the area, so they will create a path for them to forge ahead. Fudo finally arrives at the room filled with camellia flowers, which leaves him astonished. He walks in and finds Mitsuhide inside, and without any hesitation he draws his sword ready to attack. Mitsuhide observes that he is gravely wounded, but Fudo attacks, slightly injuring his cheek, leaving Mitsuhide pissed, so he attacks back to defend himself. While attacking, Fudo tells Mitsuhide that he is the reason for the whole Honnoji incident, and without his betrayal, Nobunaga and Mori wouldn't be dead. He further tells Mitsuhide while attacking that he doesn't care about history, so he would cut him down to save Nobunaga. Suddenly, Suza steps in between the two, stopping Fudo's blade from reaching Mitsuhide with his bare hand, which left him bleeding. Shocked by this, Fudo asks him why he still stands in his way when all he is trying to do is protect their master. Now he has the opportunity to make up for his uselessness in the past. He also asks Suza if he forgot the love Nobunaga showed him in the past. With this, Fudo tries to stab Mitsuhide once again, but Suza tells him to stop, as it is his love for Nobunaga that makes him not want to alter the history. He explains to Fudo that if he kills Mitsuhide, then all that Nobunaga and Mori worked for, which were documented by the history books, would all be in vain. Yagen and Hasebi run in, and Hasebi, seeing Fudo with a sword pointed at Mitsuhide, moves to cut him down, but Suza stops him, telling him to wait. He also mentions to Fudo that the Honnoji incident is the final chapter in the life of Nobunaga. With tears in his eyes, Fudo asks Yagen and Hasebi if they agree with Suza, but Hasebi tells him to ask himself. Filled up with several emotions, Fudo faced several options, not knowing which way to follow. He recounts the past events that have happened so far at the Citadel, and the last words of his second master, Mori, telling him to serve his next master well. Finally, he drops the sword and lets out a loud cry, feeling defeated. Suddenly, the sight of Nobunaga draws their attention, and Fudo calls out to him, but he simply turns his back on them, and to their surprise, walks back inside to kill himself. They all assemble outside the temple to find a huge number of the Time Retrograde army waiting on them to kill Mitsuhide, who happens to be their next target since their plans of preventing Nobunaga's death failed. With a newfound resolve to fight, the Oda swords all step forward with their blades ready to cut down their enemies. Hasebi asks Fudo if he was done whining like bitch and ready to perform his duties as a sword warrior, and he responds affirmatively. Working as a team, they all fight against the Time Retrograde army till no one is left by the first morning light. Still shaken by the whole experience, Mitsuhide asks Fudo why he chose to spare him, knowing that if he died, Nobunaga would still be alive. Fudo explains to him that he spared him because he has a nation to rule, so he needs to see his cause to fruition. Getting more serious, he tells Mitsuhide to make sure he plays his part in history, just as Nobunaga played his part. The squad watches as the Honnoji Temple burns to the ground, which makes Suza cry. He questions who Nobunaga was to those who were so fiercely loyal to him, because he still can't see him past being a demon lord who conquered him as one of his spoils of victory. Back at the Citadel, Kunihiro reports back to their master on how the mission went, and how everything happened the way it should be in the history books. Meanwhile, Hasebi and Fudo seem to be getting along in their own love language called bickering, as they tend to horses at the stable. Moment later, Kunihiro and Mikazuki are seen sitting together and discussing their previous mission at Honnoji Temple. Kunihiro tells Mikazuki that he now understands why their master sent the Oda swords on the mission with them, as the fall of the Honnoji Temple opened more stories that are vital in their lives as sword warriors. Mikazuki smiles and tells him he is happy that he has grown to understand how their master thinks, and so he is comfortable leaving the Citadel in his hands when he is gone. Puzzled by this, Kunihiro asks where he is going, but as usual, Mikazuki wouldn't give a clear response. Their moment is interrupted by other sword warriors as they troop into the room. Kunihiro gets called on to assemble everyone at the Citadel so they can all come together for some merriment. Later that evening, Suza is sitting alone outside and shortly gets joined by Yagen, who congratulates him for being named the MVP of their last battle by their master. He asks Suza if he is still having nightmares relating to the Honnoji incident, and he says no, but maintains that he would always be a part of the incident, even if he stops dreaming about it. Yagen goes ahead to mention that he noticed that Nobunaga was smiling before he took his own life, and he believes that when he turned his back to them, he indirectly communicated to them that he has played his part in history, and so they should find their own paths. Hasebi joins them and states that he still doesn't care what Nobunaga's intent or beliefs are. Yagen asks Suza if he now understands the type of man Nobunaga was, but he replies that if the man was so simple to understand, there wouldn't be so much difficulty surrounding his name. Meanwhile, the citadel is back to business as usual as Kunihiro summons all sword warriors for a meeting to discuss their next battle in defending history.